If you thought vampires just lived in gothic European castles, you may be in for a surprise. Vampires seem to be taking over the east coast of America in the 1800s and 1900s. There were vampires reported in Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, Connecticut, and Massachusetts. Newspapers called Rhode Island America's vampire capital, and nothing seemed to be able to stop it. This is the story of America's vampire panic.
Let's dig into this.
Vampires were known in legend and folklore for centuries before Bram Stoker published Dracula in 1897. The fear that the undead can drain their victims of life, consuming the blood or the life force of the innocent, was very real. There were folk cures to avoid becoming a vampire and burial instructions for keeping the dead where they belonged. Tuberculosis, called consumption back in the day, brought the fear of vampires to life.
The disease could last for years. It could start with just a fever and progress to a deep cough, night sweats, difficulty breathing, coughing up blood, weakness, and weight loss. And many sufferers looked like they were wasting away. It would spread through families and even whole communities. When doctors of the day could do nothing, the old tales would be remembered and tried again in the desperate hope of saving loved ones. And that's exactly what happened in America's vampire panic.
The first recorded vampire was Rachel Harris Burton, who died in 1790 in Manchester, Vermont. A year later, her husband married her sister Huldah, and soon she was sick too. Because she had the same symptoms Rachel had, and everyone assumed Rachel wasn't happy about her husband marrying Huldah, the community decided Rachel was making her sister sick by raising from her grave and somehow feeding off the poor woman's life force. In February of 1793, more than 500 people gathered to watch as Rachel's body was dug up. Her heart was removed and burned on the local blacksmith's forge. Some of the ashes were used to make a tonic for her sister, but she died a short time later. Both women probably died of tuberculosis.
The best known vampire panic story is Poor Mercy Brown. George and Mary Eliza Brown lived on a farm in Exeter, Rhode Island. They had 7 children. Mary Eliza became ill with consumption and was the first in the family to die of the disease in 1883. Their daughter Mary Olive, who was a 20-year-old dressmaker, was sick too, and she died in 1884, just 6 months after her mother. Edwin Brown, reportedly a strong and healthy young man, started showing symptoms next. And then daughter Mercy got sick with the same disease in 1891. And neighbors started to wonder if the family was cursed.
Mercy Brown was sick for nearly a year before she died in 1892. She was just 19 years old. Edwin was sick for almost 2 years. He couldn't breathe and coughed up blood. Desperate to find a cure for what was killing his family, George sent 24-year-old Edwin to Colorado Springs, Colorado, which was famous for consumption centers in those days. He was reportedly there for nearly 18 months, but whatever treatment he was given didn't help. Popular treatments included drinking cod liver oil and other concoctions, vinegar massages, and spending lots of time outdoors in fresh air. Edwin got weaker and weaker as the disease progressed. Finally, he returned home to the farm in Exeter.
Everyone tried to help. When nothing seemed to work, superstitious neighbors told George his family was cursed. Someone had to be coming back from the grave and attacking his family. The only thing that could cure his son was finding who that person was. George reluctantly gave permission for the graves of his wife and daughters to be dug up.
On March 17, 1892, locals went to the Chestnut Hill Cemetery and dug up the graves of Mary Eliza and Mary Olive Brown. When their coffins were open, the 2 women looked just like everyone expected. Mary Eliza had been dead for 9 years, and Mary Olive for 8. Their bodies had reportedly decomposed to skeletons. But Mercy was a different story.
She had only been dead 8 weeks, and the cold winter weather had helped preserve her body. Legend says Mercy had a rosy complexion and did not look dead at all. Of course, she had to be rising from her grave and slowly killing her brother Edwin. It was the only explanation. Mercy's heart and liver were cut out of her body. They found blood in both, confirming their suspicions. Following the well-known folklore, Mercy's organs were burned, and they made a tonic for Edwin to drink. Of course, it didn't help, and Edwin died 2 months later. George Brown had lost his wife and 6 of his 7 children, all reportedly to consumption, by 1899.
And there were many others. In 1874, many newspapers reported the strange story of the family of Isaac Johnson. After 2 of his children, Amos and Elizabeth, had become sick and died, other members of the family started to get sick. A doctor told Isaac and his wife to dig up the graves of the 2 children and check to see if plants were growing inside the graves. The reports say there were. Isaac was told to burn the plants with the vital organs of the corpses, and the rest of the family would be spared. Newspapers in the area called the doctor a quack and tried to warn folks against his advice.
And then there's the Jewett City vampire story. The Ray family had a farm in Griswold, Connecticut in the mid-1800s. Reports say Lemuel Ray was the first to get sick, and he died in 1845. He was 29 years old. Then his father became ill and died in 1851. In 1853, his brother, 26-year-old Elisha, died of the same illness. And then a year later, brother Henry got sick, and the remaining members of the Ray family made a decision. To try and save Henry, they would exhume the bodies of Lemuel and Elisha. For some reason, the family was convinced they had to be rising from their graves to drain the life from the rest of the family. The bodies were reportedly burned. Many reports say it saved Henry's life.
And of course, in 1990, children playing in Griswold, Connecticut stumbled across human bones. It turned out the area where they were playing was an unmarked cemetery containing 29 burials from the 18th and 19th centuries. Archaeologists dug up the graves and found something very strange. One casket, buried in the 1830s, contained the bones of a man believed to be in his 50s. His skeleton had been beheaded, and his skull and both thigh bones had been placed carefully over his rib cage. It reportedly looked like a skull and crossbones. And scientists determined this ritual had been performed about 5 years after the man had died. Someone wanted to be sure he stayed where they had put him.
Although we may never know how many victims there really were, Mercy Brown is thought by many to have been the last victim of America's vampire panic. In 1882, the bacteria that causes tuberculosis was discovered by Robert Koch. It would take over 60 years for the first effective antibiotic to be discovered. In 2020, a reported 1.5 million people worldwide had the disease that caused America's vampire panic.
Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.
And we'll see you on the next one.